But this morning, my sharing comes from the Bhagavad Gita. And I turn to chapter 9, verse 29. This verse is divided into two parts. Here it is in Sanskrit. Samoham sarva bhuteshu na me dveshyosti na priyaha ye bhajanti tu mam bhaktya maite teshu chapyaham. And I will discuss this in two parts. So in this verse, the teacher here, Sri Krishna, begins with a very important statement about the nature of God and God's relationship to living beings. Samoham sarva bhuteshu na me dveshyosti na priyaha. In translation, it means I see everyone equally. Samoham sarva bhuteshu. I regard everyone equally. I'm not partial. I do not hate anyone, and I am not partial to anyone. Name dveshyosti na priyaha. I do not hate, and I am not partial. I see all equally. Samoham sarva bhuteshu. So what is very clear, unmistakable in the first half of this verse is that God regards everyone equally. The divine is not intrinsically disposed to favoring some beings above others. And this, of course, is the sort of foundation of our legal system, at least the ideal of our legal system. It may not always be true in reality, but our legal systems aspire also to see all beings and to regard all beings, to treat all beings equally. As you know, here in the United States, the Supreme Court, Lady Justice is represented with a scale in one hand, a sword in the other, but she is blindfolded, which means that she doesn't make decisions based on who she sees before us, on a person's power, a person's wealth, or a person's status. I qualify by saying, ideally, this is what the justice system aspires to see everyone and to regard everyone, to treat everyone equally. And Sri Krishna emphasizes this as he does in many of his verses in the Bhagavad Gita with the word sarva bhuteshu. And you know, when that term is used in the Bhagavad Gita, as it is used at various times, it is meant to be inclusive. No one is excluded. Sarva bhuteshu, all beings, sarva bhuta, all beings. So God sees everyone without exception equally. No one is excluded. And why is this verse so important to us? This line, if I would say, the opening line of verse 29 of the 9th chapter, why is it so important in our own times? How does it speak to us? I think there are two groups for whom this verse, the teaching in this verse, is particularly important. First, for those among us who may think and believe for various reasons that they are valued by the divine above all else, above everyone else, either because of power, wealth, status, birth, fame. You can add to the list. As a consequence, they regard themselves as superior to others. And we can think of many examples. There are many groups, many communities, even many nations who consider themselves to have or to have had in the past higher value in the eyes of the divine, in the eyes of God. Look, there are religions claiming that exclusive relationships with God, claiming that salvation is available only by belonging to that particular religion, and that God loves the followers of one religion above all others. And such beliefs that God sees people of one religion in a more favorable light. Priya regards them favorably, has led historically to very aggressive and sometimes violent efforts to convert others. And so for such persons, the words of the Bhagavad Gita are very important. Samoham sarva bhuteshu. I see all equally. Belonging to a particular religion does not make you favored in God's eyes. Samoham sarva bhuteshu. There are even nations that regard themselves or think of themselves as specially chosen and favored by God. And they use this belief to assert themselves over other nations. They believe them to have favored nation status in God's eyes, chosen nations. To them, these words also speak. Samoham sarva bhuteshu, na me dveshyosti na priyaha. In some places of worship, favorite places, not only in our Hindu tradition, but in other traditions as well. So I'm not being selective here. If you go to these places, there are always long lines of people waiting to get to the sanctum, sanctorium, the innermost shrine of the temple, the most holy or sacred space in the temple. People sometimes gather for hours, making their way slowly to the central shrine, the place of worship. But if you can afford it in these places, you can pay for a fast lane. You can purchase quicker access to the holy sacred place within the temple. These places of worship, whatever religion they represent, surely benefit from people who use the fast lane because it adds to their revenues. But we should not deceive or fool ourselves to thinking that God also looks upon those who use the fast lane more favorably, that they are priyaha, they are there somehow in the eyes of God. You know, we have highways here that offer fast lanes, again, if you can afford it. But clearly, when it comes to our Hindu understanding, based on the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, there is no fast path, there is no fast lane to the divine. There is one lane. Samoham sarva bhuteshu. Wealth, power, status, We must not deceive ourselves. Do not offer us fast lanes, fast passes, quicker access to God. Samoham sarvabhuteshu. God does not favor individuals. God does not favor religions. God does not favor nations. God does not favor races. But this verse, if it speaks to those who regard themselves as enjoying favored status in God's eyes, if it challenges that understanding, I think Sri Krishna's words also speak to a second group of human beings. And these are people who, for one reason or another, were made to feel, were taught to believe that they are or were less favored in the eyes of the divine. For example, women born in societies past and present, societies that privileged males, men, and considered males to be superior or to be of higher worth than women. And women were denied privileges and rights given to men. They had to fight every step of the way, and they still do, to enjoy equality, especially in the public sphere. We know how long women fought for the right to vote, for equal pay, and other human rights, and all founded on the belief that somehow they were less equal in divine eyes. If you know the history of the United States, where most of us live in the 19th and the 20th century, here in America, African Americans were segregated in places of worship and excluded from positions of leadership because it was believed that they were inferior in the eyes of God. They need to hear. And this is what they were taught eventually by great revolutionary religious teachers like Martin Luther King and others. What was at the heart of his message? Samoham sarvabhuteshu, that you are equal in the eyes of the divine. This teaching is what leaders like him use to challenge segregation and other structures of inequality in the United States. And there are places of worship across our world that will not admit people who are considered to be of lower worth and lower value. Sadly, unfortunately, still true. There are many modern religious movements who teach that if you are wealthy, if you have great material success, or you have good health, you enjoy divine favor. You're much better. You're seen to be of higher worth in the eyes of God than those who are poor or those who are chronically ill, leading people who are poor or who are ill to think that they have been passed over by God. These are actual teachings of certain traditions. They need to hear Samoham sarvabhuteshu, name dveshyostina priyaha, that I see all equal. The whole theory of race was based on this notion of some persons enjoying higher favored status in God's eyes over others. And this had devastating historical consequences. I'll give you one example. The colonial conquests of nations like Spain and Portugal were blessed by Pope Alexander VI with the religious assumption, the theological assumption, that those who came from the Christian tradition, Christians, understood God's will better, understood God's plan, and God's plan was for the Christianization of the world. So a hierarchy was created with God at the top, Jesus, and Christians at the top, and the remainder of human beings hierarchically ordered below. And since Christians were almost exclusively white, then race entered into this hierarchy. God, Christ, white Christians, and everyone else below. Non-white, non-Christians were assessed to be deficient on a sliding scale of humanity. And as I said, with violent consequences for these populations around the world. And so for all who were made to feel lesser, Krishna's words speak clearly. His words about equality are so important. Samoham sarvabhuteshu. Name dveshyosti na priya. These are words I think we should all remember because they go to the heart of the Bhagavad Gita's teaching. You just have to remember these 5 words. Samoham sarvabhuteshu. And I think that what it means, and this is what I was asking, in those words that I shared with you at the beginning, the words that I spoke to that conference. I know I was asking more questions and expressing a deep sense of pain. But we all have to ask, what is the nature of the God that we worship? Who for us is God? And what does this worship mean for us? Because I think if we take this teaching of the Bhagavad Gita seriously as we should, such a clear teaching that I see all equally, then so should we. If God matters to us, because then the divine has to become the model for us and for how we should treat and relate to others. So whatever the forms of inequality existing in our communities, in our nations, in our world, Krishna's words are a challenge. I mean, you could add to my list racial inequality, still very prevalent with us. Racism denies this spiritual truth of equality before God. I mention and I repeat gender inequality, what we speak of as patriarchy. Patriarchy conflicts with divine equality. How we see people who are outside the borders of our nation, how we speak of them as lacking human dignity, as lacking human value. Even if we make the argument, the legal argument that some make, but do we have to deny their humanity? Do we have to denigrate their dignity, their worth? I think Krishna's words also speak to religious traditions. It's relevant for interfaith relations and interfaith relationships because it challenges exclusive claims to divine favor or divine favoritism. It provides a basis for dialogue, for cooperation, for peace among religions. Because here, Sri Krishna is saying, your belonging to a particular religion doesn't grant you favored status in my eyes. I see people across religious traditions equally. And I see this verse also because I mentioned it before to you, the word sarva bhuteshu. Bhuta is a living being. And sarva, as I said, is all. It's very inclusive. And bhuta does not only refer to human beings. He didn't say samoham sarva manushyanam, which would limit limit the circle of concern only to human beings. He says sarva bhutanam, which means that this teaching also asks of us, requires of us care, reverence, consideration for life in all of its expressions, in all of its forms. Ecological care, reverence for animals, for forests, for rivers, for ecosystem, sarva bhutanam. It's the circle of existence, the circle of existence. To say that the divine is the same to all beings is to affirm, that everyone has intrinsic inner equal dignity and deserves equal treatment and access to opportunities. So what we have here in this teaching is what I would describe as a radical teaching on the impartiality of the divine. And as I said, if God sees all beings equally, we who claim to live by divine values, we cannot justify discriminatory practices, whatever these might be based upon in our own communities, systems, practices that privilege some and marginalize others, stand in contradiction to this teaching on divine impartiality. And so I think this is so important. Now, just a comment, because when I, in teaching this verse, I'm really emphasizing the first half of the verse, Samoham sarva bhuteshu name dveshyostina priyaha. But the second half is, Ye bhajanti tu mam bhaktya mai te teshu chapyaham. So there's a kind of a paradox also in this very beautiful verse, because he says, I treat everyone equally, but those who love me, I am in them and they are in me. I am in them and they are in me. So I would like to clarify that what we have in this beautiful verse is that it is the teaching that God's impartiality, which means that God's love is universal, like sunlight that falls equally on all. No one is outside, no person, no creature, no living being is outside of the circle of divine love. But those of us who respond to that divine love, who are aware of it and who respond to that divine love, certainly we have the opportunity, or we enter into a very personal relationship with God. The sun, think of it in this way, the sun shines equally on all beings. But if you are in your home and you want to experience the gentle warmth of the sun, at least you have to draw your curtains or open your windows. Or if the air is cool and you want the coolness of the air, at least you have to open your windows. And when you open the windows, then of course the cool air or the warm air, as it happens to be, fills your room. So, Sri Ramakrishna used to give the guru of Swami Vivekananda, because he lived on the banks of the Ganges and Dakshineshwar, he used to give this example of, boats on the river, but only those who open their sails catch the wind and move along. So the wind is available, but you have to put your sails up. Then alone you catch the wind. So God's love is universal. God's love is impartial, but we have to open our hearts to that love. It is not when we open our hearts that God then alone enters into our hearts, so then we enter into the divine. God is always present in every one of us, and we always exist in the divine. But the difference is between knowing and not knowing that. And when we know that, naturally, as he says here, there's a very special relationship. So my point, I think, here is that divine love is impartial and equal, but it doesn't mean that it is not personal. It can be both impartial and also very profoundly and deeply personal. And we see, so many beautiful examples in our sacred texts of the way in which the impartial love of divine is also expressed in a beautifully personal way. I remind you only this morning of one narrative from our sacred text, which is the Srimad Bhagavatam. I'm sure you might think of other examples of your own, and this is the narrative about Krishna, Sri Krishna and his friend Sudama. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. Sudama was a close friend of his from student days at Sandipani, and he returned home, and he worked as a priest, but as a very poor priest. And then his wife encouraged him. He was not enthusiastic about asking Sri Krishna for help, but his wife said, why don't you go to Dwarka and visit your visit your friend, visit Sri Krishna. And then, you know, the beautiful details of it. And he had to take something as a gift for Sri Krishna. And being a very poor priest, he didn't have much even to eat, but he had some parched rice, which he placed in an old cloth and in a bundle and took it to Dwarka when he went to visit Sri Krishna. And when he arrived there, Sri Krishna immediately asked him, after welcoming him and embracing him, asked him, "What did you bring for me?" And he was very embarrassed to offer this a handful of parched rice. He didn't think it was worth very much. But this is what Sri Krishna reached out for, the gift of his friend, grasped and tore open the bundle, and we're told, you know, even ate the bits that fell on the floor, ate this humble offering with such joy, as if it were a feast for the gods. It emphasizes what I'm saying. God's love is universal and impartial, samoham sarva bhuteshu, but yet there is a deep personal character to that love, into which we're all invited to enter. Impartial but personal. The divine does not compel love, but invites love. Since love is meaningful only when it is freely given, the divine does not compel, but invites love. And this is the point of the second half of this verse. Ye bhajanti tu maam bhaktya. Krishna doesn't insist that one loves him, but those who love, they are in me, they are in my heart, and I am in their hearts. They discover me in their hearts, and they reside in my heart. This is what I wanted to share with you this morning as the teaching from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, verse 29. And I will stop here and invite your comments and thoughts before we close.
Anant,
Yes,
I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you.
And reminds me of a couple of things. If you remember the sixth verse from Ishavasya Upanishad, he says, Yastu sarvani bhutani atmanyamana pashyati sarvabhuteshu chatmanam tatona vijugupsate. So when we constantly see everywhere in existence in the self Atman, and the Atman in all the beings and forms, then you do not shrink from anything else. Our life of ups and downs, like the wave in the ocean. But only when we realize we are water, integral part of the ocean, are you able to experience the vastness and the beauty and the grandeur of ocean. That's exactly what you taught us this morning. It's very, very important for each one of us to understand that. I think the question that always comes up, yes, we have to seek the help, to get the help that's always available. But we as individuals, what can we do when these atyachar, or inappropriate actions are going around the world? And I don't have any answers for you. I've been asking that. Only thing we can do is whatever little we can do in our surroundings, that's all we can do. But I don't have any more profound answer to that. You beautifully described the subject matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shashi. I appreciate that. And that's one of the texts you quoted from Isha Upanishad is one that I love very much. And as you quite rightly drew the same conclusions in that text from Bhagavad Gita 9:29, Tatuna Vijugupsate.
Mhm.
One sees, the divine existing equally in all, um, does not reject anyone, does not denigrate anyone, does not, sometimes it's translated, is free from hate
Mhm.
also, which is very beautiful. I think, Shashi, that the teaching that I lifted from the Bhagavad Gita and the verse from Isha Upanishad that you lifted up, and there are other verses in our tradition. As those of us who come from this tradition and who have inherited the richness of these teachings, as you quite rightly said, we are all limited in what we can do, but it should not make us helpless or
Exactly.
hopeless. Even in the very small spheres of our communities or wherever we have some influence or we can make a difference, I think we have an obligation on the basis of this teaching to be always advocates for equality of all human beings, all beings. I think we have a responsibility as Hindus to do that. You're so right. I shared these words which Arun shared at the beginning at an international conference, and in doing so, I know I felt also very helpless, because I'm aware that those who have the power to make the difference are not often the ones who are listening. But I did it, Shashi, because I think that the minimum that I can do is to lift a moral voice.
Yeah.
And that voice came from deep within my own commitment as a Hindu, that I had to stand up and say something, add my voice, add my cry, add my lament on behalf of children
Contributor.
without voices. Um, and sometimes when we can't do anything, we can still have words of prayer in our heart, which is itself an action. But I concur with you, and I wish that um, we could have some way of influencing more directly those who enjoy the power to make changes. Thank you.
Dr. Rambachan, I have a question. I know, looking at Gita or culture, those are the beliefs that we have. But there are other religions, a lot of times people interpret things differently. So if you look at Bible or Quran, are there some parts in there or some sentences in there that would echo the same feeling? And I'm not knowledgeable enough to know that, but if there were something in those documents or teachings, is there something that could be brought up to the rest of the people that follow those religions to say, your religion says the same thing, you should follow that?
Yes.
And again, I don't know the answer to that, but
Sudeshji, thank you. The answer is yes. The answer is yes from my, I have for over 40 years now, Sudesh, I have spent a significant part of my life engaged with people of religious traditions right on to the present time. I'm involved in a major project. I just came, because you asked, I'm saying, I just came back from Washington, D.C., where we are involved in a major international project along this very lines that you asked, and it's called the Alliance of Virtue. The Alliance of Virtue, which is really seeking to identify and to lift up and to commend the deeply held shared virtues that exist within our traditions. So we have all, brought forth what we consider to be the core virtues of our tradition, whatever these are. And then we looked at each one brought forth the richness of his own tradition, and we look to see what we share. And a publication will come out very soon from this. But every tradition that I have encountered, mean, traditions are very diverse, Sudesh, and people often choose what they want from their own tradition. But more directly to your question, I have found the language often differs. So in our Hindu tradition, we speak, as you've seen, in Bhagavad Gita, that God exists equally in every being. And this is the source of human dignity and why we ought to respect and treat everyone with reverence. Other traditions, the Christian tradition, for example, speaks of the human being created in God's image. In God's image. In other words, we also reflect the divine reality in our own beings. In Islam, God's light is present. Nur is present in every human being, and there's a very beautiful quote that God is closer to us than the jugular vein. God is closer to us than the jugular vein. This is an Islamic teaching. The jugular vein, of course, we can't live without it. It is the very source of life. So I think, we would find in all of the traditions, this teachings that give us a basis for love, for compassion, for generosity, for reverence for each other. I think, these are the teachings around which we have to come together. There are people who interpret their traditions in ways that are unfortunate and in ways that justify exclusion and marginalization, and even interpreting their traditions as justifying violence and war. But at the same time, in all of our traditions, there are these which I regard, as the core vital teachings that provide a justification for love and for compassion and for generosity. And I think this is where we have to come together. So my answer to you is yes, and I look forward to sharing with you, in a few months to come, a work on virtue that answers this question in more detail.
A couple of weeks
Thank
ago,
you.
I had a minor but personal experience that illustrates exactly your point on it. I was at the local Lutheran church where I go for various conversations and like to go to their morning services as well. And I was approached by somebody who asked me just like that, out of nowhere, would I come to a discussion group that is just forming and speak about the parallels between Christianity and Hinduism. Totally on their initiative, and only because in conversations I sometimes share whatever understandings I have of Hinduism, but they come across, they are heard as being parallel, and they ask me to come and just to speak to that point.
Yeah. I think, and thank you for that, Johnny. I think, we should also, even as we share, what we have in common, and at the same time, we learn so deeply and so profoundly from those places where our traditions are unique. We should not say, that we are all saying the same thing in different words, because if we take that position, we don't learn from each other also. I think each tradition brings, very rich and new insights in that deepens our understanding of the nature of the divine and the meaning of human life. And we have to be open to the listening carefully to each other. I always say, we have that famous Rig Veda line that I often quote and explain, ekam sat vipraha bahudha vadanti, that one being, one truth, vipraha, the wise speak of differently. And I always emphasize to my audience, look, The verse is saying the wise speak differently, that the wise don't often speak with one voice. It is not the foolish who speak differently, but the vipraha, those who know, those who are wise, sometimes speak differently. So you better listen carefully. If you are to be enriched, you better listen when you hear a different voice, because you can learn something from a voice that is different from your voice. And I think this is how we learn from each other. We shouldn't read always our own meanings into what another one says or another tradition teaches, but be open to growing by exposing ourselves to new teachings and new ways of understanding, while at the same time, as you said, we're noting the shared grounds, the shared virtues, the shared ethical grounds that we have.
The largest Lutheran organization in the country has a series of sort of public position statements that you can read on their website. And one of them is about other traditions. And the central point of it is precisely that it's not good enough to welcome your neighbors. You need to learn something from them. You need to engage them in a way so that you will gain mutual understanding and exactly appreciate both the parallels and the multiple ways in which they are not the same. They have a different way of gaining insight.
Because if we I always say, if we're all saying the same thing in different words, then why should I talk to Johnny? I'm talking to Johnny just to listen to an echo of myself. But if Johnny is saying something to me that I have not heard before, then I should be attentive, because I can learn something by that different voice. So let's not dismiss differences too quickly. But thank you all. I know we have come to the conclusion, and thank you for being here and for adding your voices, rich voices, to our discussion. And thank you, Dave, for joining us all the way from Trinidad. Good to see you. And
Can I say something?
yes, please, we'll give you the last word, Madhavi.
Oh, thank you. I hope I can phrase my thoughts in a way that it makes sense and a bit quicker. But your presentation today opened a lot of thinking work, and I'm sure for everybody. At the initial part that you said, that how morally, I don't know what exact word you used, but like morally bankrupt we have become, that we cannot feel we lack the sensitivity to the sufferings that children and everything is going around us. And then you talked about how, very importantly, how the hierarchy has something to do, the superiority and inferiority that comes up, understanding of God. But the thoughts that came in, and you mentioned also about gender equality, about women and how they are in general are treated in society. In context of the Bhagavad Gita, oftentimes the verses become very easy to misinterpret. There are, at many places, many chapters, there is a reference that even lower yonis, lower births like animals and women can achieve emancipation, or that if you die with rajasic vritti, you may be born in families that may be karma sakta is the word used. So those who are involved in worldly life in such families, or if you die in tamasic with tamasic vritti, you may be born in lower births like animals. This is mentioned. So it becomes easy, even in the 16th chapter with Daiva and Asur vritti, God's words are there that those who are with Asuri Buddhi, I put them in a Neech Yoni. So this is interpreted sometimes with lesser intellects. If you do not have the Sattvic intellect to interpret this, it can be easily misconstrued that these births are lesser than a male birth, a male human birth. It can be easily misconstrued. So, it really needs clarification from people like you. Really are playing a big role to educate even our own people who study the Gita. And if it is in our religion, I'm sure in other religion this must be the same problem, to misinterpret the words and continue this hierarchy in a wrong way. So I was in Dallas recently, and I asked my brother-in-law, from your point of view, do you think that women have a harder life? Asking for a man's perspective, and he agreed that yes, of course. So when I look at it as, why did God say I put them into a woman's birth or a lesser birth, is because it's like a parent disciplining a child, that okay, this is a harder life, you will get a little harder life, but you can achieve salvation through good work in that life. So there is a hope. It's a very complex issue to understand all these paradoxes that come even in our religion. um, if I the other thing, I'm sorry, I'm shifting gears a little bit here, but in Mahabharata, Krishna, although the Pandavas had a personal relationship with him, there are instances where he has chided them when they spoke rudely or demeaningly towards the Kauravas. So it's not your business to look at them as inferior. That was the message given by Krishna to the Pandavas. So really, those who have a personal relationship need to not gain that idea of superiority. It's up to us to treat the inferior, so-called inferior people in society also equal to us, that they are equally, they have equal right to dignity. I think that's what gets forgotten in the whole confusion of interpreting these texts. I spoke a bit too much, but I just had
No,
to.
Madhavi, I really appreciate what you say. And I think you have flagged for us, if I put it like that, a very few, some significant topics that we should be addressing in our satsangs. And I think the first one is, has to do with interpretation of texts. How do we interpret, how we deal with these verses that have been interpreted, as you said, as justifying, using your example, justifying patriarchy, or regarding birth as a woman as inferior. What do we make of these verses when they appear in our text? How do we read these verses? I think you flag an important issue because it's, as you quite rightly said, also it's a challenge across religious traditions. I think every religious tradition has to struggle with this. I think that I will take it up, Madhvi, because I think that there are devices, devices of interpretation within the Hindu tradition that enable us to deal with these difficult but very real questions. And I would like to discuss that further in one of our satsangs, because I regard the question you raise as a very, very important question, certainly for us, but not only. Remember, the same Bible that was used to justify segregation was the same Bible that was used to struggle against segregation and to fight for civil rights. The same Bible that was used to justify apartheid in South Africa was cited by Desmond Tutu and others to fight apartheid. So we are all dealing with that kind of challenge, and we should see what our tradition offers us to deal with those very difficult verses. So I'm grateful that you brought it up. And in fact, the verse you cited comes from the same chapter I'm dealing in ninth
chapter, yeah.
Go on in the 9th chapter, so it's very relevant. So I welcome your words. Thank you so much. They're very important words to conclude and to be addressed. Madhvi. We can't run from such questions in our texts. So
9:32 if you want.
yes, it does come. We will speak further about it, and I can only tell you that it's part of my work, and I'll tell you how I deal with it in my writing and in my understanding of the Hindu tradition. So thank you again all for being here. Value your presence very much. Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you.
And let us conclude with one of our prayer from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Lead us from untruth to truth, from darkness to light, from mortality to immortal existence. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.